and thank you all for joining us today for the next episode of EnergySource Innovation Stream. We are very excited to have you all calling in from all over the world this afternoon. My name is Andrea Clabo, and I am a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. I'm joined today by Dr. Deane Falcone, Chief Scientific Officer at Crop One. Crop One is a vertical sustainable farming company committed to cleaning up and localizing agriculture. Its model is less resource intensive, less land intensive, and less emissions intensive, which may bode well for the agricultural sector's efforts to decarbonize and become more resilient to geopolitical shocks. We are very excited to partner with Aim for Climate for this episode. Aim for Climate is a joint initiative by the United States and the United Arab Emirates, which seeks to address climate change and global hunger by uniting participants to significantly increase investment and support for climate-smart agriculture and food systems innovation between 2021 and 2025. Before we jump in, I just have a few reminders for our audience. First, you can follow us on Twitter at AC Global Energy and use the hashtag AC Energy. We are on the record today and currently live streaming on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. We encourage you to share and post about what you hear today. Those in the virtual audience can submit questions to us through the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can later on. If you are watching on another platform like YouTube, unfortunately, we are not able to take your questions. So with that, I would like to go ahead and turn over the floor to Deane for his presentation. Deane, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Andrea, and thanks everyone for joining me. I'm really welcoming the opportunity to talk about some of what we've done in the indoor growing space. So let me get my presentation going here. Everyone see that okay? Great, okay. Get my pointer, rely on the pointer here, there we go. Okay, let me just get right to it. So yeah, so Crop One is a vertical farming company where we've employed a lot of new approaches to sustainable food production. And just to really get going, our mission is really that, to cultivate a sustainable future to meet a global demand for fresh, local, and safe food. The way that we do that is something that's come up over the 7 years that I've been around, that we've been in operation in Millis, Massachusetts, actually outside of Boston. We develop a lot of technology infrastructure to grow the plants, and we call that the plant's first approach. What that really means is, if we consider any kind of technical infrastructure, be it the water movement system around the roots of the plants or the air movement system over the top of the plants, so on and so forth, we actually use the plants as the indicator. So it's the plants that tell us if we're on the right track or not. And so that kind of emerged after 3 or 4 years of this research in order to develop the best systems, be them digital systems or mechanical systems or even processes. And so that's what that means, and I'll come back at that in a moment. And so that's what was done at our farm headquarters in Millis, Massachusetts. Again, the R&D, that's where we developed the form factor for our various farms, including our large-scale farms, as well as ongoing technological development. And that's both on the mechanical side, and importantly to me, I'm a plant biologist, so on the biological side as well. So that led into our first large-scale facility, which is the Eco-1 facility in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. That's our first scaled, very large-scale commercial farm. That's designed for continuous output. By that I mean regular output each and every day. That offers maximum food quality as well as maximum food security. And on the left there, you're just seeing some of our cultivars that we've grown over the last years and offered them into the market over the last 6.5, 7 years under the Freshbox Farms brand name. So again, our focus is to effectively and efficiently grow plants in a controlled environment based on their biology. So I'm going to expand into this form factor aspect to kind of introduce the Eco facility, our large scale farm out in Dubai. We actually started with shipping containers. These are the 40-foot shipping containers I think most people are familiar with. They're obviously all over the world, and they're a great format to start with because they enabled the research to begin. So if you're trying to establish the environmental parameters, what temperatures, humidity, carbon dioxide levels to grow the best plants possible, you only have one set point. And so we range between 12 and 15 of these units, and we still use them for production, and we still use them for R&D greatly, but it's not really a scalable solution. So you need to really scale this in a big way to kind of balance the economics and balance the energy requirements of a large scale production facility. So that's what we did. We did that by the production of or design of these modular growth units. It's basically a large growth room, walk-in growth room, and I'll show images of that in a moment. And then providing some degree of automation. In our case, nutrient dosing and monitoring is completely automated, which was not the case when we started. And so we knew how to program the system because we had been running it for several years in a manual way. Then finally, the deployment of our large-scale facilities. I'd like to say just a couple of things about the ongoing R&D, and that is the first being the growth of high-quality crops. Very high level concept there, but basically the use of the environmental control system that's tied to the needs of the plants to not just give the obvious kind of quality factors one might think about, such as texture and flavor, but also nutritional components. And so we can actually maximize or even enhance the nutritional content of these foods. And that's something that is really a new paradigm for production of such perishable greens that are eaten largely raw. And so there's a lot there, and I don't have time to go into a lot of those details, but suffice it to say that targeting any mineral nutrient, vitamin, or even beneficial phytochemicals is something that we're actively engaged in. Then the other big R&D goal, this has to do with the energy component, is yield. And so yield is growth, maximizing the growth per unit time or per unit growth area. So very, very important because we're trying to get the most out of the energy that is put into the system. And I should say at this point that energy is rather intensive. However, it is all electricity to run that environmental control system and to provide the light needed to grow the plants. Okay, I'll move on to a couple of images of our Eco1 facility, again, out in Dubai. And this upper left-hand image is looking down an aisle of the racks. And these racks are essentially identical to what we have in Massachusetts at our headquarters. It's just that it's scale. So there's many more of them out in Dubai at Eco1. And so what you're seeing here are the stacked shelves. You can see some of the lights there. You can, the white is the actual water containing tray. These are pretty long individual racks at about 24 feet in length. And so you're looking at about 3 of them in alignment. So it's a pretty long row there. And on the right, you have an image of the outside of the building. It's a 3-story building. In the lower left, you have what we refer to as our plantlet development unit. There's a couple of individuals there looking at a tray of sown plants, and then a close-up of soon after germination of those plants. Once those get a little bit larger, those are transplanted into what we refer to as the modular growth units, these large-scale growth rooms, and that's where they remain throughout their harvest. So that unit is large. As I said, it has the capacity to produce more than 3 metric tons of output per day of produce. And the hydroponic system that we developed there is very likely the most water use efficient system that's possible. And the reason for that is that plants are constantly transpiring or evaporating water from the surface of their leaves. This is in fact how water and nutrients move, from the roots up through the plant and get nutrients distributed throughout the plant. What we do here is that actually increases the humidity of the room, putting more water vapor into the room. And so what we do is capture that. It's by the environmental control system, that is dehumidification. We capture that water, repurify it, and put it right back into the plants to grow the plants. So in addition to all of the water going into the system, all the water that's entered into the system goes through the plant. That water that is released from the plant is actually recaptured and put back in, so it gets used over and over again. So again, with regard to water use efficiency, it's maximum as you can grow plants with. And in addition to that aspect, we highly purify the water, and I think I've already kind of indicated the cleanliness of the environment itself. That produces an extremely clean, healthful product, which has implications such as elongated shelf life that I'll get to in a moment. Now I'll just go over some of these kind of advantages that has come out of this controlled environment agriculture system that we developed. Again, being in completely sealed units enables precise control of those environmental conditions. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but plants are extremely responsive to their environment. And so it might sound trivial that we can control the light duration or the photoperiod, but it has big impacts on how the plant grows. And so with that, we have a greater land use efficiency, some 400-fold compared to outdoor grown. And that's because of these stacked shelves that you saw previously. I already mentioned the 95% water use, that recapture and reuse of that water. So basically none of the water is lost. And then up to 21 harvests per year. And that's because with the growth rate that we are able to achieve in the whole process by which we can propagate the plants, we can harvest them that many times. And that also what gives us the very, very high yield. So again, we're doing everything we can to maximize that growth rate. One of them, of course, is the addition of carbon dioxide, which suppresses photorespiration. That simply gets rid of that inefficiency of how plants grow. Now, I'll tap into that one more time a little bit later. In addition to the closed loop recycling of water that I mentioned, I also wanted to mention the utilization of the plant nutrients that's dissolved in the water, in particular nitrogen. So nitrogen happens to be a very costly component, that is carbon and energy costs. And so like with water, all of the nitrogen fertilizer or nutrients that go into the system are utilized by the plants. And this is monitored digitally, so we never overdose. It's very, very precisely controlled. And so that means we don't have any waste going out into the environment as well. And then kind of an obvious one, the local distribution, this urbanization of farming means that there's less greenhouse miles. There's less miles for transport of that food to final consumption. And I quickly mentioned the food waste aspect. This is an added benefit that you think is only good for the consumer, which it is, but it also results in another savings in carbon costs that I'll get to in a moment. So very important attribute there. And so with that, I'd like to switch to how we believe we're poised to engage in the global energy transition. And that's starting with this urbanization of farming, that is movement of farms into urban areas. And that simply means, as I've mentioned before, it places production at the point of consumption. And so no delivery, and then the freshness factor that ties into that as well. So many of these have multiple benefits, as you'll see. That reduced transportation, of course, is reduced carbon costs by the burning of fossil fuel for that transportation. And as I mentioned, this enhanced nutrition because of the freshness. So you don't have breakdown of vitamins and minerals and that sort of thing through long-term storage. So because it's produced at the point of consumption, it can get to the consumer rapidly. And then another may not so obvious probably point here is that these large-scale farms can be placed close to energy generation, and so there's less loss of energy wastage with transmission. There's another advantage that I'll mention in a moment, but that actually becomes very important when we think about renewables. The other area of how we're poised to engage with energy, the global energy transition, is through carbon mitigation. I've already mentioned a couple of these. Obviously, if the systems are run, these large-scale farms of ours are run by electricity, that means they're amenable to any form of renewable energy sources, in particular, very large-scale solar arrays, hydroelectric, if available in that area, and even wind can contribute to that overall usage. And so by that, we're really offsetting those carbon costs. And then this other aspect of being located close to fossil fuel burning power plants enables release CO2 from the burned fossil fuel to be captured, release carbon dioxide, I should say, to be captured and fed back to the plants. As I mentioned, we actually purchase carbon dioxide. We have both in our headquarters and our Eco1 facility in Dubai. We have large liquid carbon dioxide tanks that is converted into gas and fed to the plants. It's almost remarkable that we're actually buying that gas right in today's environment of increasing CO2 in the atmosphere. So this concept then of a fossil fuel such as a natural gas burning power plant, that some, even upwards of 50% of that off-gassing of carbon dioxide can be captured and used to grow a plant. And as I'm sure most people know, the dry mass of a plant is about 95% carbon. And I mentioned the fact of the reduced food wastage. About 1/3 of all food globally is wasted, unfortunately, and this is a rather constant over the last several decades. And that results in, believe it or not, 3.3 gigatons of carbon released annually. And so by eliminating just the food wasted aspect means that we're saving lost carbon that has been fixed by the plant through photosynthesis is now consumed. And I already mentioned the maximized nutrient use efficiency along with that water use efficiency in nitrogen fertilizer in particular, because the manufacture of nitrogen fertilizer is the largest carbon dioxide emitting chemical industrial process. Kind of amazing. It takes lots and lots of energy to take N2 gas in the atmosphere and make, for example, ammonia or nitrogen or nitrate. And so there's an energy cost there, and then there's another cost to provide one of the components for that process. So again, by making judicious use of any nitrogen fertilizer is advantageous on a global scale. And then finally, with the propagation of our own large-scale farms as well as other companies that are doing the same thing, we can consider the reversion of cropland to long-term carbon sinks. That is not deforesting for the purpose of traditional agriculture, but reforesting for those long-term growth forests, which are true carbon sinks. And that's a little bit futuristic, but that is an added benefit of moving this direction of this urbanized farming. I'd find the last minute or so, I'd like to turn to the last quick topic, and that is our kind of product development of plant-based protein. Leafy greens are highly nutritious, consumed raw. They have lots of vitamins and minerals, phytochemicals, as I mentioned. But protein is also a big area with regard to global total nutrition for humans. And so, of course, at the moment, soybean is the #1 plant provider of protein for human dietary needs. And so we've identified an interesting crop, an aquatic species that grows extremely rapidly and has a very, very high amount of proteins in its leaves. And so when we refer to that as high quality dietary protein, what we mean is the amino acid composition is pretty much matched to the dietary needs for human nutrition. So we're quite excited about this project because it has the capacity, as in our leafy green approach, of continuous production and ongoing production that's amenable to automation, that sort of thing. So we're very excited about that. And combined with the expanding trends that we see in the desire of people to eat more plant-based foods, the eventual displacement of beef production, for example, could have a dramatic effect on greenhouse gas emission. Because when we talk about agriculture, we have to talk not just about the plants, but the plants that are used to grow the animals that we consume at large volumes. And so with that, I will be happy to take any questions. So thank you very much.
Well, fantastic, Deane. Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. So many different threads that I would love to explore from everything you were discussing. So I'd like to kick us off with a few of the questions that have come up in the chat from some of our attendees. And I want to kick off by zeroing in on clean energy specifically. You talked quite a bit about how Crop One is really positioning itself to be a major player in the global energy transition in a lot of different interesting ways. So what is Crop One's broad timeline, or maybe the outlook or the goals for transitioning towards something like completely renewable or clean energy or electricity to support its operations?
Right. So the long-term goals is to get more and more to complete renewables, and that has to do with, farms, 4, 5, and 6, for example. Our farms being planned now. It's all dependent on locality. So if there's, for example, a hydroelectric plant close by, you can bet that we're going to tap into that. But in the meantime, we're just going for kind of ideal production and distribution, again, close to highly dense population centers. We'll just purchase from the utility more green energy, exactly as you can do from your residences. So you can get more from wind, more from solar. And so that's how we'll phase it in at the first stage. And then, as I said, we're in discussions with some really interesting, very large scale solar array providers. And they have the energy sufficient to completely supply all of our energy needs for a large scale farm. So that's pretty exciting right there. And of course, there's the associated technologies, of course. So one thing that's exciting about the area is that you have the related technologies that are being developed. And that, of course, is storage technology or batteries, which is very important for solar in particular. And so that's really how we plan to do it. It's going to become easier and easier as more large scale facilities come online. And again, we will be in discussion. In fact, I think that's the second item of the 2 high criteria. One is population density. The second is availability of renewable energy.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that very detailed explanation. I want to get into a slightly more granular question that has come up in the chat, specifically asking, what plans do you have to incorporate beneficial aerobic organisms into your hydroponic systems going forward?
Wow, that's an excellent question. Goes back to my early days of my plant-based microbiology. For the moment, we like what we're seeing with just the precision control, our digital control of nutrient provision. And I mention that because the advantages that microbes I'm assuming you're talking about putting them in the water system of the growth system. We do very well with just providing exactly what the plants need. The levels of iron, magnesium, calcium, copper, those sorts of things. And so what beneficial microbes really do is they facilitate the uptake of those mineral nutrients. Phosphate, for example, has to be held at a specific pH. And so I'm sorry going into too much detail here, but microbes make a lot of the components that literally bind these components, bind phosphate, bind iron, and facilitate their uptake into the plant root. And so because we can control the pH with a high degree of precision, as well as other parameters in the water, we're doing very well with that. And that's where we stand now. Who knows about future research that might lead into that, but because we keep our system so clean and going for such a long period of time, we're not quite ready to introduce another organism. And that is another organism. And of course, you now have to maintain and balance that growth amongst all the other microbes that might be introduced into the water. So for the moment, we're sticking with kind of digital administration of the nutrients of the plant.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that very detailed explanation for how that could potentially work. So I wanted to zoom out a little bit and talk about this issue from a more geopolitical perspective. So as we know, the availability of crops like wheat, for example, commodity crops, has been a really serious concern this year with the ongoing war in Ukraine. So I wanted to ask if you anticipate that an operation like yours or vertical farming more generally could potentially act as a stabilizer of sorts for the global commodity crop shortages or other supply constraints. For example, in the case of another war, a drought, a typhoon, any sort of crisis in the food supply chain.
Absolutely. I mean, for food security, as you just mentioned, all of those kinds of global events are well served by indoor farming. For crop one, we're not really targeting commodities at this moment. Indeed, we are when we consider the plant-based protein that I mentioned, because we have the organism chosen. But for the grains, which take an enormous amount of land area, and they actually do very well. You're right. There's the global imbalances there that can occur. For indoor ag to really make a dent in that, and that's carbohydrate, right? So the grains are typically carbohydrate provisions for human dietary needs. That might take a different type of crop that does well. You can conceive of growing something like wheat indoors. I mean, you can grow anything indoors, but the real issue, of course, is the practicality. It does require a fair amount of energy, so you better have a crop that gives you pretty good output. Again, that's why we kind of lean more toward protein production for the moment with our new product development, as opposed to additional carbohydrate. And then kind of conversely, looking more at the highly nutritious crops that can really provide advantages to human health if you're eating more healthful crops. So that's kind of the long answer to that. But there are probably sources. There's dwarf rice, for example, that are probably amenable to growing indoors, and that's a good staple right there.
Great. Well, I'm sort of thinking on that topic, maybe one step further. You talked a lot about the many advantages that come with hydroponic farming, and in terms of land use, in terms of water usage, and things of that nature. But there are, of course, some disadvantages as well. So I wanted to ask specifically in, say, developing countries or countries that have drought-stricken areas, such as the Horn of Africa or other regions with similar environmental crises. Would it be possible to have a facility like what you currently have in Dubai, or would requirements for electricity, water, space be problematic or perhaps prohibitive to having a facility at that scale in a perhaps less developed country?
Absolutely, you could apply the systems in those areas. If there are if the energy capacity is not sufficient for a large scale farm, you can reduce the size of the farm. Obviously, we targeted that size because it makes the most economic sense, particularly for Western cultures and things like that. But absolutely, that can be done. And again, the water use efficiency is so high that it's probably the best means by producing such crops as leafy greens. And so yeah, that could be a direct application. Again, and the farms can be sized according to the local energy production capacity, which is a very important part of the whole system.
Excellent. I know we're getting a bit short on time here, so I wanted to wrap up by giving you the opportunity to tell us a bit about what you all need in terms of a policy perspective. Of course, we've seen the White House and Congress doing a lot lately on all sorts of climate change and clean energy technologies. So if you could ask for anything from a policy perspective, what can policymakers be doing that would really help you to reach the goals that your company has set forth for itself?
Excellent question. Thank you for asking that. So really, it's the recognition which is happening. The industry is so new that it's taken government regulators some time to, first of all, acknowledge it and then understand its benefits. And one quick example would simply be tainted produce, for example, from outdoor grown produce that was contaminated with something like E. coli. It used to be there's a recall. You take all the spinach or romaine lettuce off the shelves, including indoor grown. That's now changed. So the recognition is already there from such entities. But I think going beyond that is recognizing the positive impacts and giving, and these exist on a local basis. So we've been in contact with many different regions in different states throughout the country, and there's tax incentives being offered and things like that. But I think more uniform approach and kind of standardization. There's no standardization in the industry at the moment, so we're kind of setting our own. Each company is setting their own, and so that needs to happen. And I will say that we are a member of a consortium of companies that are assisting with that, and we absolutely we've had representatives from the USDA visit us, for example, in our eco facility in Dubai. And so again, the recognition is there, and I think that, like with typical agriculture, I mean, this is food production, so it's very, very important, and just providing those sorts of recognition, maybe even crop loss insurance if there is, that traditional outside agriculture receives, might be beneficial to encourage more players in this new industry.
Excellent. Well, unfortunately, I'm afraid that our time today has come to a close. I'm sure we could go on for hours about all of this. But I want to go ahead and thank everyone for tuning in today, and particularly to you, Deane, for your time and your excellent insights. I would also like to thank everyone who had a hand in putting together today's event, including Amaya Haddad, Maya Sparkman, Emma Halbronner, Jacqueline Hines, Jamie Adams, Aza Wisile, Kate Ivanchich, Rebecca Meacham-Nance, and Eamon Coughlin. We will all definitely be keeping up with Crop One's work going forward. If you would like to rewatch today's event, a cache replay will be available on the Atlantic Council's Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter pages. We certainly encourage you to share with your colleagues and friends. And with that, that is all for now. We want to thank you again for joining us. I hope you have a lovely rest of your week, and until next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.